CGTN, China Global Television Network.
It is undeniable that cities play a vital role in our lives. They are a hub for economic growth, innovation, cultural expression, and political activity. With the world's ever-growing population, cities have increased in size and number, resulting in an unprecedented demand for resources. Therefore, it is crucial that cities are built with sustainability in mind. Sustainable cities are those that are designed and managed to ensure that those living within their boundaries have a high quality of life with minimal environmental impacts. To achieve this, cities must strive to provide access to affordable housing, reliable and efficient public transportation, sustainable waste management practices, and well-planned traffic management. This week on the program, we'll explore how African cities can work towards becoming more sustainable. I'm Beatrice Marshall. Welcome to Talk Africa. Well, let's find out now about some sustainable solutions to urban challenges. And I'm joined here today by Frank Katolati. He's the founder and CEO of Othalo. I'm also joined by Samuel Kamunya, Head of Business Development at Basigo. Gentlemen, thank you for joining us here on the program today. Let me start off by looking at some statistics about where Africa's population is, because more than 65% of Africa's population is expected to be residing in urban areas by 2060. Africa's economic growth, as we see today, is gradually being driven by urbanization, by expanding cities. In your areas of expertise, and let me start off here with you, Frank, in your area of expertise and what you're trying to do, how do you envision a sustainable city?
We live in a world where we're actually consuming 1.5 planet each year as a way of resources. So we're over-consuming. So we need to recycle or actually upcycle. That's what Othalo does. We have an abundance of plastic waste material. 10 billion tons of plastic waste are being produced, which 71% is still in landfills, in nature, oceans, rivers. These are the materials, kind of materials we need to utilize to actually be able to create sustainable cities and sustainable environment at all. So it is, for me, the reuse of material, reducing the use of non-recyclables and virgin materials, or else you won't be able to actually create a sustainable community.
Samuel, what's your view?
To create a sustainable city, you need a sustainable environment. And when we know that public transportation contributes to more than 30% of the pollution in cities. So what we do at Basigo is we're bringing electric mobility by revolutionizing public transportation to be able to create sustainable environment using sustainable transport. So we are making available a sustainable transport as an alternative to people who use transport to be able to create sustainable environment around the cities.
So let's talk about that for a bit, because that whole concept of having electric vehicles in a continent like Africa, in many African countries, urban transportation is often ill-equipped, inadequate, not good for the population. How do you compare having the electric version versus the diesel version?
One of the biggest ways in which urban cities commute is by public transportation. More than 70% of the trips, or more 70% of the movement of the urban population, they move using public transport. So it's only that this public transport is through buses that are driven by fossil fuels. So when you look at Africa, that is not an exception. It's still the same. Most of the urban transport is driven by fossil fuel engines. So when you come into a place where you want to revolutionize that, you must make the adoption of this technology possible. So for us, what we're doing at Basigo is we're trying to make it an alternative. Next time a government is making a purchase of a public transport solution, next time in Kenya we call them matatu owners, are making a purchase decision of what to invest in for public transportation, that the option that will be available will be a public transport electric bus.
How does that compare in terms of cost?
So what happens is the challenge around electric transportation everywhere in the world is that it's very expensive. It's the upfront cost of buying these buses is very expensive compared to diesel buses. You're looking at 3-4 times more than the cost of normal engines. So what we do as a company, as Basigo, what we have adapted is a financing solution business model where we are able to match the cost of an electric bus to the cost of a similar capacity diesel bus. How do we do that? We are able to do that by being able to finance the battery aspect of the bus, which is the most expensive component in the bus. So we give you a subscription that for every kilometer you drive, you're able to remit some amount to Basigo. With this amount, you're able to be able to charge your bus, maintain your bus, and service your bus while being able to afford it at the same price you'll be able to afford a diesel bus.
Frank, I want to talk about the issue of affordable housing. Many governments around the continent are now grappling with this whole issue of how do you provide affordable housing to its citizens when there's a rapid rural-urban migration. How serious is the problem of affordable housing on the continent?
Africa today has a housing deficiency about 160 millions. That, when I'm talking about those 160 millions, that's those who are in urgent need. And when you go up to the ones who are in the lower middle class or the upper lower class, you could add another 70 million. But let's keep to the 160 millions. Kenya has a housing deficiency about 2 millions. But this, due to urbanization and population growth, by 2040, it will have about 2050, it will have a doubling. It will be, the housing deficiency of Africa south of Sahara will be 400 millions. So that is a crazy amount of housing that's needed. And as we see the population of Africa grows, today 1.2 billion, by 2050 2.5, and by 2100s 4.3 billion people. So we see that it's an increasing demand. And that's where it came in what I told you earlier. The use of virgin material, that is not sustainable. If we're going to urbanize, we have to find a solution which does not suffocate the planet as it is. As I said, we're already overusing the resources. So in our case, what we envisioned is that we use what's waste material. We use plastic waste, and we have a patented solution that allows us to build affordable housing on an industrial scale. One factory, 2,500 houses, 60 square meter houses per year, creates 1,500 jobs. But if you're going to battle this, we have to think otherwise, because there is so much about it. It's not only the housing itself, it's the financial model and the affordability. The building of the houses, as we see it, is not a big issue. That can be done. We have we have abundance of resources. We have the solution which we can mass produce. We can create jobs. Because it's not only about getting people into the
houses.
Cities.
Yeah.
And that's when I think you use the word, when we, not you, but we use the word sustainability without actually thinking about what does sustainability actually mean.
So there's two issues you're raising here, Frank, because you're talking about 400 million in sub-Saharan Africa. That is a huge number, and that number is going to be gradually growing as we go into the era of mega cities. Yeah. When you talk about affordability, how is this all going to be made possible?
It is about the resources, the cost of resources, the cost of the production, but it also has to do with lifting the population up so they can actually, from the poorest into the middle class, which is my dream, so that they can actually afford, because as there is a demand on resources, which we've seen on cement and all other costs earlier, you can't build affordable housing So you need to make sure that the population who's buying the houses is, we use the word empowered, where you can actually be given a sustainable life. You take them out of the hand-to-mouth situation. We want to create a sustainable community, and this is where your idea comes in, where we can use the batteries of your buses afterwards to store energy, because we want the houses to be not only houses or homes, but platforms for energy production that can be sold into the grid, and people actually, the houses becomes a means of income, perpetual income. But yeah,
so there is a lot of complementarity between the energy version here and what you're trying to do in terms of affordable housing here. But Samuel, you know, you've talked about the alternative now being the electric cars, but you know, we are seeing now a lot of African governments introducing tax incentives when it comes to e-mobility industry. But still on the continent, we don't have, we haven't seen many countries adopting electric vehicles. Why is that?
So the first thing is that the upfront cost is very high, which makes it expensive more than the normal diesel cars. Number two, the charging infrastructure. You have to have a product that needs to be charged. So developing of charging infrastructure is also an expensive affair. Thirdly is the technical expertise around the service and maintenance. You have a new technology, so you need experts to be able to maintain. So when you combine all those three things, it makes them an uphill task for African cities to adapt. But when you come to Kenya, one thing that favors Kenya the most is that more than 90% of our electric is renewable, is sustainable. It's natural, it's not coming to an end anytime soon. So that makes it Kenya first the right place to start with by the time you go out to the other cities in East Africa. We know, like, I'll give you an example in Kenya. We know in Kenya that we produce around 3 megawatts, we use around 3 megawatts of power during the day. But at night, we only use 1.2 megawatts. 1.8 goes into loss. But when you adapt electric mobility, charging happens at night. So at night, you're able to have the use of this power which has gone into waste. And maybe by that power being used, brings down the cost of power, because this power that is produced, you still pay for it whether you use it or not. But when we get to use it, it will lower down the price. You're also looking at the government as we speak in Kenya. The cost of importing an electric vehicle, an electric bus, an electric car, the excise duty is at 10% for start. Normally for all the vehicles at 20%. So that's the first incentive the government has given. The second incentive in Kenya the government has given is if you're at a commercial phase and you're operating electric mobility, your tariff is slightly lower than even a domestic tariff. So you're able to operate your companies at places where it's the business opportunity is very attractive. And now we're about to get into a financial bill. And there are very many incentives the industry has asked that we want to see the adoption of these electric mobility to be high by government giving more incentives into the industry.
So Frank, I want to come back to the question of, you know, affordable housing and exactly how realistic this is, because the United Nations has set a 2030 deadline actually for all governments to ensure adequate, safe and affordable housing, including upgrading of slums. First of all, is this achievable in about 6 years?
I could be really quick about that. That's just no. That's not achievable at all. But because it's 160 today, but by 2050 it's 400. As I've seen, but this is a global problem. 1.8 billion people is lack of affordable or adequate housing. So this is a global thing. But if you look at Africa south of Sahara, there has to be a lot of financial intensive for people to actually start manufacturing this, to utilize the resources needed. We really hope that, as we look upon it, we need everybody who has the mindset of being a part of the solution has to come together. There is actually no competition. We need to do this together, and we would, so for Otao's sake, we would like to invite local partners to help us do this, we actually invite ourselves to the local partners to help us do this.
How do you see the e-mobility being a game changer for traffic management?
So one of the places where you experience this pollution is in traffic. And with one diesel bus, you get up to 60 tons of carbon pollution in a year. With one electric bus, you get only 3 tons of pollution in a year. So when you look at this, you're seeing, and what pollution causes. It causes respiratory diseases, makes the environment dirty, noise pollution. So adoption of these electric buses reduces noise pollution, reduces air pollution, reduces the environment pollution. So it is a game changer for everything. And when you look at, going back to Frank, what he's saying about, when you look at the two things we're dealing with, he's dealing with housing, we're dealing with transportation. All these are public goods. They are things that ordinarily governments will be the ones giving solution to this. But now we're the private sector, we have come in, and we see a lot of public-private partnerships just to make sure that there is convergence of ideas, convergence of resources to be able to see that what the private sector is doing in housing can be complemented by what the transport, in electric mobility we're doing in transport. And you're looking at the end life. The electric bus uses a battery. So this battery will give you 8 years on a bus, and it will be the end of life for that battery in the bus. But when you take that bus to housing, it can be able to power the set of electric batteries in the bus can be able to power 30 houses with power. So you're looking at a lot of convergence, and where we can be able, and will help what the cost is talking about, it goes down just by the two industries working together.
All right, gentlemen, we will continue with this discussion in just a moment. But for now, we're going to take a short break. And when we come back, we will have more on creating sustainable cities in Africa. To stay with us. Welcome back to Talk Africa. Let's continue our conversation on creating sustainable cities. Still with me, Samuel Kamunya and Frank Katulati. Samuel, I'd like some comparisons here now, because China is the leading manufacturer of electric vehicles globally. If you compare a country like China and a country in Africa, like Kenya, for instance, that's that's starting out, what are the main differences when it comes to adopting that technology of e-mobility?
So what you're looking at is, as Basigo, the partners we have partnered with to offer this transport solution, the electric bus, is manufacturers from China, OEMs. So one of the biggest electric bus manufacturer we're looking at is BYD in the world. They supply Europe, they supply Asia, they supply America. And now you've partnered with them in Africa. So what you're looking at, when you look at the comparison, everything can be manufactured in China, but in Africa, we can become the local assembly hub. And that is what we're looking at. We're looking as Basigo Limited. By the end of this year, we want to do all our local assembly for the buses. So what does that do? That, number one, lowers the cost of these buses. Because some materials will be incorporated from the local economy. You will create a lot of jobs for that. At the same time, you lower the cost and you get a lot of government incentives just by saying you're doing local assembly. Then when you look at what China will do is to supply us. So yes, you've left the production in China, but the fully built happens in Africa and in Kenya for this matter. And in Kenya, we can become a hub for the rest of the cities to be able to be the ones who assemble and be able to distribute it together. So there's a lot of similarity. We see China as the supplier, but the value chain gets finished and completed in Kenya.
So in that sense, though, if I was in Kenya and had an electric vehicle, and if I had a malfunction, for instance, what happens?
That will be very rare because electric vehicles are known to have very few moving parts. They're driven by motors, so it doesn't have an engine, there's no transmission system, there are no oils, there are no filters. So the chances of you breaking down are very rare. However, if you break down, what we've done as a company, and we are giving it to university students, to interns, and to other people who are interested, we are able to train them, courtesy of our OEMs, on how to locally diagnose the problems and solve them. Currently, we have been operating in Nairobi for the last 1.5 years. And for the 1.5 years, the buses have been on the road 98% of the time. On a normal diesel engine, they count uptime at around between 70 and 80%. 80% is very good, but mostly it's between 70% and 80%. For the electric bus, we are at 98.9% of uptime, meaning all the things. It's not that the buses haven't developed issues, they have developed issues, but we have been able to solve them through the skills that we have learned from our OEMs, and we have been able to pass to our technicians locally.
All right, Frank, I want to talk solutions and benefits, particularly the benefits of, solving urban solutions using recyclable materials.
That is actually the core of sustainability, because we have used materials for several years. So by using that, we are actually able to reduce the impact we've had on the globe for the last 5 decades. So we need to we need to let Mother Gaia be able to catch up with our consumption, or else we don't have a planet much more. The buses, the electricity is also a solution to that. For us, it's the same, just different. But we don't have much new materials left. We need to think new. And that is actually what the electrical vehicles are doing as well. They think, okay, we need to reduce the impact on the environment. By the way, I'm from Norway. We are the highest consumers of electrical cars.
Correct.
It is huge in Norway.
Correct.
I thought last year 70% of all new cars were electrical cars have been sold. So that's the way you go forth. And we need to adopt the same thinking in all other aspects of life. And that is where I think Othello is. That is where I think your company is, the buses, the cars. And we need to look upon all the resources we are actually taken out of ground from nature and see how we could reuse that over and over again to actually to withhold life on this planet.
So I want to get some of your winding up comments. And Frank, let me start off with you because, by the end of the century, Africa will have 5 of the world's 10 largest mega cities. When you look at that growth, the question now is, how fast do you see that growth? How fair and how sustainable do you think it will be?
If we continue down the road we've been doing so far, I don't think it's sustainable. I don't think we're going to be able to manage that. Not at all. I don't want to tell the people of Africa what's wrong, and because we Europeans have told you guys what is wrong and how you should do it for hundreds and hundreds of years. Never worked because we don't know your culture. We have imposed our ways of thinking, most of our own benefits. And that is where also the sustainability thing, not only for Africa but for the world, but now I'm focusing on Africa. Because Africa is going to have 5 of the mega cities in the world. It's going to be here. Here's where we have the biggest population growth. Almost 4.5 billion people in 80 years. But where you have to start, if you're going to have change, it's going to happen with the youth. Youth is going to be the driver of the future. Women is going to be the driver of the future. for me to get a proper change, to create a sustainable world where we're actually able to live together in a sustainable way, we need to create safe communities where youngsters can go to school, feel safe, be able. I'm a dreamer myself. I want people to dream. I want people to feel that it's okay that I dream. I can follow my dream. I live in a community which allows me to dream and follow my dreams. I don't live in a hand-to-mouth situation, because it is those kind of people who comes up with sustainable solutions. And that is what Africa needs more than anything else. Focus on the youngsters' education, especially women, because they have a tendency to think further ahead than we men do. We men have been running this world for the last 1,000, 2,000 years, and see where that got us. So more women into leadership, as policymakers, into politics, leadership of business, leader of communities, and I actually think that is the solution, because they think ahead several generations. Well, we men are amazing at finding the solution in the now situation, but not as we're not good enough to think ahead.
Right. Samuel, your points here. The big question, how fast, how fair, and how sustainable do you think growth will be when Africa, gets these 5 megacities?
So in our vision, coincidentally, for Basigo is that we want to be in every major city in the next 10 years. And we start by Nairobi. In Nairobi, we look at having 1,000 electric buses by the year 2026. And you can imagine what 1,000 buses will do. One bus is able to eliminate 60 tons of carbon from the environment. So you can imagine what 1,000 buses can do. And 1,000 buses in the 5 mega cities, that will be a game changer for everybody. So we're looking at having sustainable transport and revolutionizing that transport in the 5 mega cities in the next 10 years. Yes.
If there was one word you would tell stakeholders, policymakers, or citizens, what would you say to them?
The best time to make policies and to adapt electric mobility was 10 years ago. Look at Norway where it is today. The second best time is now. And we'll look at ourselves 10 years later and see what will have happened, how far we'll have gone just by making those decisions today. Making it the penetration of electric mobility in the mega cities easier, removing the barriers to entry, and making use of the sustainable energy that is mostly available in Africa. Yep.
Well, gentlemen, it's been a very interesting discussion indeed on building sustainable cities, but that's all we have time for on this edition of Talk Africa. A very big thank you to our guests today, Samuel Kamunya, Head of Business Development at Basigo, and Frank Katolati, Founder and CEO of Otalo. Remember, you can be a part of this conversation on our social media platforms on Facebook and Twitter, and you can watch this and other editions of Talk Africa on our YouTube playlist. Do join us again for more Talk Africa next week. From me, Beatrice Marshall, and the team here in Nairobi. Until next week, it's bye-bye.